So thank you, everyone, for coming out and to talk about what I think has been somewhat of a complex topic to talk about because there's a lot of different angles. Some of these conversations started 18 months ago, and then the bond happened, and a lot has occurred to get us to where we are right now. And what we really want to do is make sure everyone has this set of information of how evolutionarily we got here. I realize everyone's going to have different opinions on a variety of decisions that have been made, but just making sure that the set of facts about how we got here is shared and clear amongst people, and as you make your decision how you want to vote. And so to that end, the board's not going to talk very much tonight. We've got here the team that's been working on the plans throughout, starting some people obviously last fall of 2018, and H2M and Veronica have been working on this project for 18 to 24 months, and then PBDW and Kevin's firm Triton have gotten involved in the late spring. And there have been a lot of a variety of different planning meetings and discussions, and then when their plans were brought to the board, we had a lot of discussions, and probably somewhere just in the last, over the fall, 5 or 6 hours of detailed conversations going back and forth, making what we've found to be very difficult decisions as well, and weighing all of the information that we had, and what you'll hear about here, and the pros and cons. And what I can tell you very clearly is that no one on the board wanted to rush into this decision, and it was very difficult, I think, for all of us. And we made the decision having, and the vote came out as it did, to put this on the ballot for you to vote on as a result of a lot of very challenging conversations, weighing a variety of pros and cons. So what we want to do is give you an opportunity to hear some of those things that we've been weighing, that we've been discussing, as you make your decision for how you want to vote. So with that, I'm going to kick the meeting over to Ray DeVell and Rena Mandy from PBDW Architects to take you through some of the evolution of the current project.
Thank you for the invitation to present the current Hillside edition. I'm Ray Dovell, and as Doug said, this is my associate and co-designer, Rena Mandy. We're from PBDW Architects. As you may know, I'm a 20-year resident of Hastings on Hudson, and Rena is a graduate of the Hastings school system. So obviously, the success of this project is enormously important to us. I particularly would like to continue to live here for another 20 years. Let's go on to the rendering. This is a rendering of the addition in its current form. Several factors influence this design. The first being the orientation of the building towards the playground, with a large projecting plane of glass, which you can see facing the playground. This was very important to the educators, that there be this strong connection between cafeteria and immediate outdoor activity. Then the second was the desire to minimize the impact of the addition by breaking the scale down as much as possible. This means lowering the heights of portions of the building that don't really benefit from a higher space, meaning the area where the seating is nested, the telescoping seating is nested, and what you don't see beyond, areas for classrooms and food prep areas. So we felt that helped with the character of the architecture. And another one was the desire to acknowledge and reinforce the informal pathways from the Chemka parking lot and other informal pathways along the face of the building to the major entrances. There's this wonderful, Hastings has a wonderful history of informal pathways that we tried to capture in the design of this project. So that suggested a slight rotation of the building, as did the fact that we wanted the glass to face out into the play area. So we rotated the building, which you'll see in plan shortly. And the third was to create a shaded area. Fourth was to create a shaded area in front of this. It faces east. There'll be some sun there, so we elected to propose a pergola, which is it's a lattice structure above, which will provide shade for informal gatherings and will kind of act as a front porch. This is a communal space. We wanted to reinforce that notion. And then finally, the idea is to provide as much natural light as possible, and we did that with the big window facing onto the playground, as well as the clear story, which Rena will point to up here. This is a big translucent panel that floods the interior with light. So this is really a light-filled structure. We believe the result of this is a simple, inviting, and appropriately scaled addition to the school. This is an interior rendering of the cafetorium in its cafeteria configuration. It's a really simple space with a minimal level of finish. A few of its features are the lack of a raised stage. We elected to remove the stage because we felt we could get double use of the area for it. So there is no raised stage. There is a proscenium, which you see in green, but there is no raised stage. And this means that we can use that area for cafeteria seating. So this is a highly efficient use of space, and this seats the entire, this would seat an entire two grade level entirely in this configuration. It doesn't have to be used this way, but it can certainly be used this way. There's abundant, you can see the natural light coming in from the window that faces east, and most importantly, this enormous clear story, which is under the truss, which spans the entire length of the building, where natural full spectrum light will flood the interior. And then what you can see, the retractable seating then is tucked under that truss area. That's one of the lower pieces of the building that you saw from the outside. So we elected not to bring that up full height, but to keep that as compact as possible. And then storage for, this scheme will have storage for 100% of the fold-up tables, which are on rollers, meaning you can convert this space very quickly to auditorium use, so it can be changed during the day quite easily. If you didn't do this, you would be using folding chairs, which would take forever to set up and break down and store. There's no storage for them. They would require more storage than we have. And then the next image, the final rendering, this is the interior rendering of the cafetorium in its auditorium configuration. And what you should see here, these are fully automatic retracting seating at a pretty steep rake. And this is really quite efficient because this can be done with the press of a button. This retracts and folds back and projects automatically with electronically. It's a pretty simple mechanism. We've used them in lots of schools. It's a very popular thing to be doing now because of the time it takes to set up and break down. The other advantage of this is that you get a steep rake, which means you have really good sight lines onto the stage. If you had, let's suppose that you didn't have the retractable seating and you were sitting flat, a flat-floored stage is not going to work because you have no sight lines. You would have to raise a stage. So this is really an efficient use of the space. And then finally, a really simple array of acoustic panels for in a space like this, you need to provide both for proper reverberation so you can get by without electronic amplification, and for control of sound when it's used as a cafeteria and it gets quite noisy. And then finally, there is a very minimal lighting and sound system appropriate for a lower school. So with that, Rena is going to take you through the planning and the planning of this.
Thanks, Ray. So just to orient everyone a little bit, the existing school is in gray, hillside. Most people come up the driveway and drive in around the roundabout. And the addition is the proposed area in white, with the exception of these two areas over here, which are a renovation of existing classroom within the existing building. So the existing building is in gray. This is the main entry into Hillside. The playground areas, the cafeteria overlooking the playground areas. And part of the orientation that Ray had spoken about, angling the building, was to really create this central hub of a space that's already kind of the center of activity for the school around the front playground, and also to resolve the natural pathways. So the pathway coming up from Chemka Pool right now kind of just ends on the field, and so this would help to resolve that pathway, bringing you up onto the front porch in front of the addition, and then across through to the main entry of the school. Before I get into the details of design, I'll just speak a little bit about the program. So before we really started the design, we led a programming exercise where we met with school administration, we met with principals, with teachers, with the maintenance staff, and we produced a detailed document for all of the requirements for each individual space. The cafeteria was, it's a little dark, isn't it, right?
A little dark.
Let's see, it might come back up. I was doing this before. So, okay. The cafeteria is meant to accommodate 2 full grade levels. So right now, the lunch is scheduled across 5 periods, which really interrupts the academic schedule. And the goal of this program was to reduce lunch to 3 periods so that you could free up the academic schedule a little more. And that required accommodating 2 full grade levels in the cafeteria. So that's between 240 and 280 students. The auditorium, I know the existing high school auditorium gets filled up for all of the Hillside plays, and so that's about a seating capacity of 540 people, and that's what we targeted for the Hillside space, and a stage to fit about 60 to sometimes up to 100 kids, mostly on choral risers. 4 classrooms, sized consistently with the existing lower school classrooms. There was a desire for kindergarten classrooms, which the existing kindergarten classrooms at Hillside are actually above 1,000 square feet. The rest of the classrooms on the lower school are about 900 square feet. So we continued the 900 square foot module for the lower school, which is also an SED requirement minimum for kindergarten. So they allow flexible use for kindergarten, first, second grade as well. There is a requirement for music lesson spaces. There are individualized and more targeted music lessons that do not currently have a dedicated space. So we are looking to accommodate those resource rooms as well. I know the school is in need of resource rooms, and to the extent that they built some resource rooms on the existing stage in the gymnasium. So we're looking to accommodate resource rooms as well. And then obviously the support spaces for all of those areas. Kitchen, storage, toilets to accommodate the rooms, elevator to allow for adaptability and accessibility downstairs. For the lower level, an egress stair, mechanical and plumbing areas, and data rooms. Sorry. So just to bring you in to the building, the cafeteria overlooks the playground. We have a new entry vestibule and exit vestibule to come in and out of the cafeteria space. The cafeteria will be set up with about 24 to 29 tables using the flat floor area, and that can accommodate those 2 full grade levels. The kitchen is at the back of the addition. and the storage space for all the tables to fold up. So all the tables fold up and wheel into that storage space. That storage space has been sized to accommodate the 24 tables. The bathrooms to support the cafeteria usage and auditorium usage, and the 2 classroom spaces at the upper level, which are, the 2 classrooms at the upper level for kindergarten use, but they're sized similarly to the existing back classrooms, which are currently used for first grade. So, and then the resource room and music lessons room are a renovation of an existing classroom at Hillside. The setup for the auditorium, with the seats out, you can see the seats bank out, show a stage to accommodate the 60 to 100 kids, and orienting the stage against the existing building allowed us to really have the backstage area connect to a green room and connect back to the existing school so that there's a ease of flow during a performance, so that you really get a great usage of all of this backstage area during performances. The lower level has 2 classrooms, which again replicate the same existing module of classrooms at the rear of the building. And then below the kitchen, there is a storage area and mechanical and plumbing area. And so that space is really the result of the natural grade change on the site. So as you walk down the path towards Chemka Pool, there's quite a large grade change, which is why there's a lower level just at the back classrooms and not at the front classrooms. So this space is also at that lower grade level. And so we've captured the space underneath of the kitchen as a storage area and mechanical and plumbing area. So just to clarify some things for the building size, the usable square footage of the cafeteria is similar, actually, a little bit less than the bond. So the cafetorium area, the usable square footage for the cafetorium area in the bond was scoped at 4,300 square feet. We're just under that 4,300 square feet for the cafetorium space. The stage and backstage area in the bond was scoped at about 1,750 square feet. And the current plan shows the stage, backstage, and green room area at about 1,600 square feet. So we're actually a little less in the usable square footage, but that still accommodates the program. The proposed classroom sizes, as I said, are consistent with the existing first and second grade classroom sizes, which meet that 900 requirement by SED. So it allows for flexible use for both kindergarten, first, second grade, all the lower school. In the bond, the first 4 classrooms were meant to be used for music only, and so they were sized below that 900 square feet. So they were at 815. And then the lower level classrooms were continuing that same module at the 900 square feet. So that was in the bond. Our current proposal is for above 900 for both the first floor and the lower level. So we're totaling about 162 above, which almost offsets the underage for the cafetorium space. So the additional square footage, the gross additional square footage for the building is really driven by the necessity of the support spaces. So the toilet rooms, the storage areas, all of the space, the mechanical areas, all of the spaces to make the building function, to really make it work. And a huge portion of that is the large storage area below the proposed kitchen as a result of the natural grade change. And I think now I will turn it over to Kevin, and have a glass of water. So he will take you through some of the costs.
It's just up and down. Rena, just up and down.
It's up and down.
Got it.
Yep.
All right, thank you, everybody, and good evening. My name is Kevin Sawyer. I'm with Triton Construction. We're here assisting the school district as a construction manager, and I'm very happy to be here tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about costs, how we got to where we are today, some of the contributing factors, what's in the numbers, and we'll start right off with this. So the original pre-bond budget was just under $7.2 million. In that number, and then our current estimate for the current design is approximately $9,450,000. Those numbers include $900,000 of contingencies. Contingencies, if you're not aware what they are sort of they're buckets of money that are used for various things throughout. First item is design. Second is to cover costs as we move forward through the project. You know, costs go up year to year, so we want to make sure we cover the escalation for that. And then a construction contingency, which is a percentage of dollars that we hold within the project for unforeseen conditions, incidentals that might come up during the actual physical construction. Okay? The bond projects, aside from Hillside Addition projects, are all within the budget or less. So what does that mean? Obviously, the Hillside project is not the only construction project that's part of this overall bond. As we go through the process, we're doing a series of estimates against the budget. And so far, we're tracking right on budget for the other projects. So we wanted to make sure you guys were aware of that as well. And also that the overall bond includes a total contingency of $2,056,000. So the $2 million of that contingency is also $900,000 of that is in that 2.56. Okay. Some of the cost drivers that have come up along the way that we want everybody to be aware of is that we have gone through a series of design and estimating completion periods. We go through a conceptual design, we go through a schematic design, we go through a design document period, and then a final construction document period. Along the way, every time we do, to think about it, it's like rungs in a ladder. 30% documents completed, 60%, 90% documents completed through the design process. Along the way, we help support the district by providing estimates which are based on other projects in the area that we've been involved with, so we have actual costs, as well as getting actual subcontractor quotes as part of the budget. So we developed a design and a detailed cost estimating pretty thoroughly. As we get closer to the end for bidding, the design gets much more detailed. You can understand it better, and we can also estimate it better. Post-programming design has higher square footage to accommodate the building's functional needs. So obviously, what we're trying to do is we're trying to maximize the amount of square footage to include all the functions and programs that you're looking for, but also trying to minimize the costs. And we'll talk about a couple of the ways we do that in a minute. Some of the costs that drove it was also the retractable seating that's being proposed for the flexible multi-purpose cafeteria room, which you saw in those pictures that were provided, as well as some site work, scoping and development, including some construction staging. So we have to include some costs within the project to be able to physically build it. Temporary fencing, roadways, signage, access, those types of things. And then the final thing that we wanted to bring in to everybody's attention is that Some material cost increases in the market have taken place over the past 4, 5, 6 months. Some of those items include here structural steel. I can tell you it's also some metal products as well. And so we've seen those costs pass on to bidders, contractors who are bidding projects. So we're seeing a slight increase in costs in the market due to the market. So the project team is looking for ways always, from the beginning, when we started this project and until today, and right through until we actually bid this project, ways to reduce costs without compromising the school's needs and the program usage. And how do we do that? Well, some of the areas that we looked at was areas where we can develop interior finishes in a different way. One of the things that we did was we decided that we didn't need all of the kitchen equipment necessary to run the full kitchen. And of course, this is all coordinated with the people who are in these programs, the kitchen programs and all the other programs. So the designers do a great deal of talking with the users to make sure we can implement these things without issue. Replace some of the millwork with furniture items. Purchase some items off of various state contracts, and then to take on work in-house, which is not unusual. Usually school districts take on work in-house and as opposed to going out to bonds year to year. So we're going to introduce some of that into this project as well to save some costs. Okay? All right. And so the next part is a little talk about the capital reserve funds, how they work. And Maureen will take care of that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. So I'm just going to speak to the Capital Reserve Fund, and that's the topic of this upcoming vote. So capital reserve funds, the purpose that they're established for is to be used for funding capital projects that the district feels are needed to be done. It is not used to offset the school's operational budget in terms of just a revenue source. A capital reserve is separate from the school budget balancing. These funds that, if they are in fact gone to the voters and voted on as capital reserve funds are required to do, they then are eligible for reimbursement from the state of our 42% building aid reimbursement. So an example of that is if we were to use $1 million, then $420,000 of that would be come back to us in reimbursement from the state. And the capital reserve funds were in fact used to supplement the last bond. And it is a fairly consistent practice. Dobbs Ferry right now is currently doing that as well. And we did the last time too, to complete the fields. The capital reserve is just one of the district's reserve funds within the total reserves available in the general fund. The district will, if the voters approve the use of these funds, we would still have approximately $6.5 million in reserves. And the capital, sorry, that's a repeat. District will continue to prioritize the funding of the capital reserve funds in the future budget years. And what I mean by that is these reserve funds are funded when there's some excess money left over in the operational budget at the end of the year, and we're required by law to any monies that are in excess, we have to assign back to either balancing a future budget, or we put them in reserve funds where we feel that there may be a need in the near future. We've done that with our tax certiorari's, and we've been doing that with our capital reserve funds, which has been very helpful with our planning. And this is, again, just a snapshot of all the reserve funds that I spoke about. And just there's a different, and these are all established under statute and what you're allowed to use them for, how much money you're allowed to keep in them. Some of them do not have, you're only allowed to keep certain dollar amounts in each, depending on the district's liabilities. So the tax certiorari and some of these, they're correlated to liabilities that the district has. And as you can see, that the only reason that we have used those funds to pay back liabilities of the district, and currently our balance is appropriate for the amount of liabilities that we have. And these others are just employee benefit accrual liability, retirement system contributions. That's money that we can put in reserve to offset increases. And these also reflect planned usage for next year's budget. So that's why some of the numbers, it's an estimate of June 20th. But the bottom line here is that at the end of June 20th, I'm estimating those to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $7.8 million. And then if you were to deduct out the capital reserve project amount, you would be around that $6.5 million range that I mentioned earlier. I also just want the vote is asking for authorization of use of the funds. It doesn't empty out. It is only used when the need exists. So depending upon if the contingency that we spoke about, or Kevin spoke about earlier in the bond, which is $2 million, and that's for the entirety of the projects, if we didn't need money in other projects or things we didn't have a need for construction contingency, that 900,000, that in fact, and that's how money we would spend. So depending upon, where we end up at the end of the project, there's a likelihood, yes, we may need to use some of it, but the idea would be that we need to ask voters for access to it. It doesn't necessarily mean that we'll spend it all. We'll only spend what we in fact end up needing if we're authorized to do so. This I'm going to turn over to Veronica, and just to kind of speak to, because there are some other infrastructure projects that are identified on our 5-year building condition survey, and Veronica will just speak to some of those needs. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here tonight. So as Maureen mentioned, there are some future infrastructure projects that the district may consider. So just to give a little history of that, every 5 years, the district has been required, as well as every other district in New York State, to complete a building condition survey. So in 2010, one was completed. In 2015, a building condition survey was completed. As a result of that, and that survey is actually used to identify potential projects so the district can plan for the future, as well as for the state education department to plan for potential funding or building aid that they may be providing as a result of these projects. So that was across the state in 2015. So as a result of that, the most critical projects that were identified in 2015 were included in the 2019 bond. Those projects include roofing at both the middle school, high school building, as well as at Hillside, some masonry restoration around the outside of the building, which is essentially brick repointing and cornice repair, communication systems at both buildings, and boilers at the middle school, high school, as well as the floors in both buildings that are in poor condition or the asbestos-containing material that would be abated. And so those were as a team, those were the projects that were identified as being the most critical, and so those were included in the 2019 bond. There are potentially projects in the future that were identified in the 2015 building condition survey that the district may need to undertake. These items noted, the elevator upgrades, flooring, windows, sidewalks, and upgrades to the air handler at Hillside, are projects that the district may need to plan for in the future, and so we've identified them here. And then it's also just important to understand that with the infrastructure work that's planned for the 2019 bond, your building's going to be in really good condition. We're addressing the roofs, we're addressing the masonry restoration, so the envelope, which is the exterior of the building, will be in very good condition, and you're very fortunate that you have Joe Martirana and his team, who does a lot of work in-house, and they're able to maintain the existing systems, and so that's been a very fortunate part of the district as well. So, you're welcome.
Thanks, Veronica. Okay, so basically by what we're asking, by using the district reserve in this upcoming vote next week, would be to, and if in fact it was successful, we feel that the current design, as Ray and Raina presented tonight, would be fully realized. The project will meet the school's programming needs for the spaces identified in the pre-bond conceptual plan for the addition. The project will continue to be on schedule, which was an extremely important consideration when the board decided to move forward. Because of the timing of doing such a large-scale project, it's kind of critical to start at certain times. That would allow, again, for the mobilization and rock removal during the summer, and then they'd be prepared to bid to allow for the start of that construction in late spring, and the project can, be well underway in the summer of 2020. If the reserve vote does not pass, the hillside addition will need to be fully redesigned. The program and scope will have to be reevaluated. There will be additional professional fees to be incurred with the redesign. The redesign is not guaranteed to come within budget because, at this point we don't know, with pushing some of that out into the future, where we'll end up being. And the project would have a delayed start of 2021. The delay may, not definitely, but may result in increased costs due to escalation in materials and labor costs. There's some additional information and resources that we've been trying to put up as we get questions in that we know are important for us to answer. So that's our, you can't see it here, but that's a link to the page on our website that we set up. And questions, which
Ryan Markowitz from Hastings. I think it's a really pretty picture. I'm wondering that the design components, the information, was available before the bond vote, or at least what was projected as what the school was going to be like, or the addition to Hillside was going to be like beforehand. If that's so, the architectural firms that put in their bids after the bond would have seen them. Did they not speak up before the vote?
Well, I think again, we've spoken a lot. It's a schematic design, and although some of the uses of the spaces are different, it does still address, the needs of the school are still being addressed. I think that in the opinion, we feel that the building still represents an addition of 4 classrooms. I think the programming, that a full programming does actually occur after a bond passes, because at that point, you're not sure if you have the full authorization, and that's just in terms of like the physical use of different rooms may have changed slightly, but we are still we still had identified, as I looked at that list that Raina prepared and spoke to tonight, we did have 4 classrooms identified as in the addition, a cafetorium space. Music lessons were also a need to give a designated space for that, and also resource rooms, which were some of the things that we knew that were needs that existed. So they did in fact know, but they did a programming that maybe refined the design. Is that a better, I mean, Ray and Raina can speak to that better, but in terms of the process and the architects can speak to that, is the way the process does happen.
And that process resulted in a 30% increase in the cost of that project.
Yeah, and yes, and I think as Kevin spoke about tonight, I think it was a variety of factors that led to that increase. Both in costs, some escalation, and then of course some design elements or needs that were more flushed out, and then realized that there was some additional space needed in the building. And also with the reorientation of the building, I think is where the ability to pick up some additional storage was gained in that square footage.
If I can just have another follow-up question. I believe it was a review panel that had expertise that picked the winning bid. But can you tell us about the competing bids and whether they also covered the same shortfalls in the design, the proposed design, as this one apparently has, and what the amount of their bids were in comparison to the winning bid?
Well, I think they come in and they don't give you a design. It's like an interview. They come in and they give you a proposal, but they're not giving you a competing design. That's not the process. It's more like interviewing different firms and selecting one that you think best understands or be able to meet or will deliver the like fully realized design that you think will best fit the needs of the school. And that was really the decision. And the panel included, you know, a variety of people. So that there was a recommendation made to the board based upon meeting with the different teams and making a recommendation who we felt was best to create a design. Thank you.
I have a few questions. I think one point of clarification is it was in October that you found out that this project was going to be $2 million over budget. That was after these architects had been selected. It was when the construction company looked at what they designed and said it's going to cost you $2 million more. At that point, instead of saying, go back to the drawing board and come up with something that meets the budget, you decided to go on this process and basically tell the community, well, if you don't vote for it now, we're going to be delayed. So you had a chance to go back and fix this in October, but instead you know that this community, when it comes to our schools, will be fiscally irresponsible and give you guys a blank check. I mean, why do we need a 280 student capacity cafetorium? Okay, I think the total enrollment of Hillside is under 700 students. To do 3 groups of 280 students puts us at 840 students in the cafetorium. That's adding a whole other grade to Hillside. How many classes do we currently have that are 140 kids? This community just doesn't have that much children. Are we going to I mean, my husband grew up in Ridgefield, Connecticut. They had a boom, they had a couple of large grades, they built this gorgeous, beautiful high school at immense cost, and then the population dropped. And they've got this pretty much, you know, half-vacant, gorgeous high school. I'm just not seeing why we need this level of space. And my understanding is we'd only lose about seating for 40 children. I don't even think it's that many in the plan that isn't so expansive. So is it worth $2.2 million, which you don't even have? You have 1.3. So we're going to say 2.2 and hope that we're going to find savings in other parts of this project. I don't know if anybody's done any major work on their house in Westchester. Has anybody not spent at least what they were told the job was going to cost? We have $900,000 built in for contingencies, but now you're already saying we need another $540,000 because of cost increase. Isn't that built in the contingency? But now we need another $500,000. This is just, you guys haven't done a good job. This makes no sense to anyone who spends time and reads through this and tries to understand this process. There are half-evasive answers as to what's going to happen to our taxes. You have a 5-year plan and other projects that have to go forward. And there's a blurb that makes almost no sense in one of the Q&As that basically says, yeah, it might have to come out of the operating budget. Translation, that might be a tax increase. I think that there's been a lot of hide the ball as to what the impact of this really is on this community. I mean, I don't see an explanation for why we need this. This looks like what my college, private liberal arts college, with donors who will give millions of dollars to the school, did in its renovations. Not a public school. This is a public school. We all love our children. They do not need such an extravagant, you know, enhancement to the school. We think we're a liberal community. Go look at the schools down in Yonkers. I mean, send your kids to Fieldston or Riverdale if you need them to go to a school that is this fancy. This is a public school. You have a responsibility to be fiscally, you know, prudent to the taxpayers, and I don't see the prudence here. I see lots of bells and whistles that everybody got excited about, and when the price tag was too high, there was no grown-up in the room to say no.
So, do you want me to address some of the questions? So, I mean, I'll speak to at least just the cafeteria. I mean, there's a couple that we can speak to, but in terms of the enrollments at Hillside, the idea is to have 3 lunch periods. Obviously, that would mean one cohort of students would have lunch potentially, right? No, 2. I'm sorry, yes, 2. I'm sorry, at each. But right now, our fourth grade is 138 students. So in designing it, if you were to go on the lower number, and we looked at our enrollments, and I think the idea, as they said, it was to fit 240 to 280 in terms of a lunch period. So even though currently we do have cohorts that are smaller than that, we have had in the last 15 years cohorts of 140. So you would have to fit 2 sections, you would have to design for at least that capacity. So that was part of the number. And I think, right, they spoke about the size of this building before, and I think you're right that there was a lot of thought that went into the bond in terms of there were people thinking maybe you should build 6 classrooms, maybe you should do 8 in addition. I mean, that was a lot of discussion last year around that. And to your point, I think we were thinking, like, we also didn't want to oversize the current addition. So, certainly we're not building a brand new school. Our current enrollments over the last 10 plus years, plus what we're seeing in terms of our projections, are really showing a consistency of somewhere in the 1,700 to 1,800 range in the school district. That's been pretty consistent for the last 20 years. So in terms of the actual size of the building, it isn't oversized. We also now, things have changed. Special education programs are back in the district, and we want to continue to support that. And that is, although it's not always obvious in the enrollment number itself, though, having children that have unique needs that have services in the school, that's why some of the space is also required. So in terms of the addition itself, I think we believe it's the appropriate space. I think, we looked at that, and I think in terms of the board's decision, I think there were multiple factors, I believe, that led to the increase that we're seeing from the pre-bond. But I think in trying to address what was in front of them, and from what we were told by even our construction manager, although you get an effective square footage number, it wasn't going to be so easy to say, okay, scale back that classroom 50 feet and you're going to get 50 times like 490. When you're building a whole building, there's different parts of the building that are more expensive. There's site work and things that there's a cost in that. So it wasn't as though the board, it would have required even at that point a redesign. It would have required a redesign, a major redesign, which there is a cost involved in that as well. So, looking at it, and I know the numbers saying, well, if the numbers are 2 million and we're only asking for 1.3, as we spoke about before, when you put out the entire bond scope, the good thing is you have areas in which the bond where you actually, you find that some of the budget numbers are lower. So we had some projects within the bond that, and as we went through, and the board knew this, that some of the projects were actually coming in lower. So they knew, oh, well, now we have some savings in these other projects, which are going to close that gap of that $2 million deficit. So what does it mean? Like, how much more are we talking about? And it is a very tough decision. But like I had mentioned, if in fact, even if we played out that we had to spend the 1.3 extra over our original bond, we're going to get $600,000 of that money back. And it is a huge investment. It's a lot of money. But I think the concerns also of a redesign, which would have eaten up some of the savings and some of the other factors, I think were part of also a lot of the moving parts of it. I mean, I don't want to.
Can any of you talk a little bit about, I think some of the questions on everyone's mind are just the idea of how did we get here from a programming perspective? And you went through so for example, some of the support spaces you mentioned, this idea that opening up the back with the angling opens up 700, 800 or so square feet that we could choose not to do, but once you've got the ground cracked open, it seemed like a smart investment. So there were a variety of different programming decisions. I wonder if maybe you could just talk a little bit about how some of those conversations.
Well, the programming, as Rena explained, ultimately resulted in net areas that were not much different than the bond. What she went through with the areas within the building proper. What were not accounted for were the change of grade in this big block of space that potentially could be opened up. It's not, because it's excavated, you have to build a foundation wall there anyway. That space became available. You could elect not to do it, but it's there, and it's a good use of the space to use as storage. Other things that weren't directly accounted for were storage, the nesting area for the retractable seating. That was not accounted for in the original bond. The toilet rooms that you really need to have adjacent to it were not accounted for, nor were mechanical spaces, nor were storage spaces for the tables and chairs that go into the cafeteria. So those were the things that bumped the area up, but you know, but the program areas really have not changed in the net area. In fact, we're pretty efficient in terms of what we've been able to achieve within that prescribed original area.
Thank you. Couple of questions on budget transfers. I know I asked this question. I just want to clarify something. I looked on the budget, and it looked like you had $15,000 set aside for project manager for this year, this school year. And there was budget transfers almost, I think they were, if I added it up correctly, about $180,000 worth of budget transfers. How does that money go back into those lines? And is that money going to be aidable because you used it for this project?
So some of the transfers were for some of the reprogramming work that was done with our new architects. Other amounts in there, before we issue our ban, like get our money from the funding, that would then need to be transferred out. But there are some professional services that we incur that are beyond the bond scope.
So that actual 160-something thousand has already been under budgeted for this year.
Correct.
So that's kind of like we're in the red in that line already.
Correct. Well, it's covered now, but it would have been, yes.
Okay. Sorry to, I'm just trying
No,
to
that's fine.
clarify
I know.
stuff. Just because I know this May is a new budget,
You right?
so this is going to impact everything. It's just the ripple effect of, you know, what comes down
Correct.
the road. My other question was, you talked about that $900,000 that's going to
Contingency?
be in-house help that's going to go towards that line, that $2 million is going to help offset?
So the 900,000, Nancy, so the current bond estimate, that $9.4 million number, what we're saying in there, that number still includes almost $1 million worth of contingency.
Okay.
So, I mean, and again, you have to do it to be responsible because, you know, to the point of where if something, you know, were to need it, but there are times in going through other projects before, you know, there's times in which it actually doesn't, like it's extra on top of what you think it's going to cost, like, you know, and there are percentages that, based on the total amount that are assigned to each. So you would have a certain amount for construction contingency, some for design contingency, and some for escalation. So what we're saying is that right now, if say the project comes in like right on the hard number, it would actually be 900,000 less than that estimate. And that does not include what we think can be further savings. So that 9.4 million actually included like demolition and things that, as we understood the scope of work and different things that we're going to be required to do, things that Joe was like, well, and of course there's times, you know, we can only do so much, but we look, and this happens, this is our practice even in our last bond, as there's areas in which Joe and the staff can say, you know, we can do the demolition of that site. We can remove, for the mobilization of there's a tennis court, no, excuse me, basketball court and the rims, and just things where if you were to pay a contractor. So that number is not included. I think what we're suggesting is that, you know, we're still using that $9.4 million number, but our hope is to get that number down as far as possible, doing things that we know make sense and that would be, you know, that we can do. And that's why putting that higher number, we're like, this would be, you know, with this, all the contingency in there, so that everyone knows, like, it's, you know, it can't be, well, I guess it always could be, but, you know, we don't end up in a bad situation.
Okay. The other thing, when I looked on your expenditures for your operational, I guess, operation of plant, it started out with a $2 million amount, and it looks like as of today, I guess, you have $183,979. So I know you encumbered, I guess, 1 million something.
Okay.
Things that are going to happen. So now you're down to 183,979. So that's not a lot of money left for other
Yeah.
emergencies.
Yes, so with Joe's budget, which is consistent, you use the word encumber, you could tell you were a school employee. You know the lingo, But, so within Joe's budget, much of the encumbrances are not necessarily spent, but we do, there's certain service contracts we have in the beginning of the year, and as you know, sometimes in knowing that you may need it, we want to make sure that there's money available for that. So our boiler contract may be a number that is fully encumbered for the, if we needed to, have multiple services of it in the year. So currently, and I don't have the run in front of me, but it does in fact reflect things that are encumbered but not yet spent. And then, but to your point, the unencumbered amount would be what would be available for other items that are not accounted for.
Okay, the other part, with the budget transfers,
Sure.
when they were taken out of like the TRS and
Yep.
Social Security, how does that money go back into those lines?
So it doesn't go back. It's similar to when I was speaking about, like when people say, well, how does the money get in the capital? How does the money get in reserves in the first place? So we have an operational budget that we run each year, and it obviously we have our revenues over expenditures, and at the end of the year, thankfully we've experienced this. For a variety of reasons, you may get a little bit more revenues or some things come in less than budget. So in those line items, as an example, so during the course of your operational year, there's things that are going to happen, right? There's times in which, obviously, I think most people probably understand that, we don't go out with every, like to the last pencil. We don't, unfortunately, there's not a lot of flex, but sometimes you have savings in one area. So as an example, TRS and ERS, we're given rates for the TRS when we set our budget. If the rate comes in a little bit lower, if you have employees that are hired at different rates, it's driven by like employees' salaries and things. So you may have savings there. If the board so elects that they feel there's another warranted expenditure of that money, they can make a transfer within the total, not to exceed, obviously, the operational budget that was approved for that year. If they weren't to do that, and just say they decided not to, the money then that's left over at the end of the year that's where you say, okay, we have 500,000, we're going to put 300 in the capital reserve, we're going to put 200 in the, so it doesn't go back in, but it's identified as that we don't need, that there's extra money in that account, for lack of better words.
So when we do the new budget for the next year,
Yes.
you don't necessarily raise that line the same every year.
No. It's based upon, and there's, it's a lot of things. It's looking, you have, and the TRS, depending on how the rate goes, can go up or down, and Social Security, again, is driven by our employees that we believe. And as you know, sometimes we have to, we may not have hired 15 people, so we're trying to estimate what we believe some of these people will come in. So because of that, and of course, you don't over it, but you give yourself like some, reasonable number. So if any of those, if you hire somebody a little bit less, that's where that kind of extra money comes from.
Okay. Sorry to be a pain in the neck.
That's fine.
I just had a couple of questions. Now, with the consumer price index, I think you mentioned, I don't know if
CPI?
it was one of your presentations or whatever. You and the superintendent should go on the road
Oh, God.
with all your presentations. They're very informative, but, you really have to listen to it twice. But the CPI, would that impact the project that is at hand now with the addition? Is that going to lower the prices?
What's interesting is that, we get a CPI that's obviously, but it doesn't always mean that we see increases sometimes that exceed that and sometimes that are less than that. That's a number that is established. Obviously, it's the national CPI number, but it doesn't always reflect, I'm speaking in the construction, I think I'm speaking, am I correct in saying that, although it would have some correlation to like pricing, it isn't like a perfect science. It could be, it's like a supply and demand thing for them. And actually, I don't want to, at least what I see amongst my colleagues, the interest rates are at a historical low for borrowing, right? The Fed cut it, they're scheduled, I believe, to most likely to cut the rate twice more this year. So because of that, similar to not only schools, but in commercial, they will start, people will do more construction when the rates to borrow money are lower. So I think, I know with, with not only Hastings, many of my other school districts do look at opportunities when rates are at historical lows to then like say, well, you know what, we were going to put this off for 3 years, but we can borrow at less than 2%. So long-winded answer, but I do think some of that plays into like the supply and demand number on the construction numbers. I mean, I hope it is actually at that rate.
Hope so too.
Yeah, I think that would be wonderful.
Last
Yes.
one, I promise. Let me remember what I was going to say now. The finance committee, the last finance committee you had, I kind of looked at it real fast, and it's hard to know with the upcoming budget in May, the hiring you're going to have. Because I know there was a question about hiring a digital learning person.
Yeah, I mean, I could speak, I think that's
Director
been
of-
put on hold.
Director of
Valerie
Learning.
can speak to that, I'm sorry.
Director of
Hi
Technology.
there, how are you? Maureen and I and Melissa have spent a lot of time with the budget managers, really looking at, as Maureen explained, and as we explained in our Budget 101 presentations, and thank you for looking at them. The CPI, as well as state aid, really makes a big difference in terms of what the gap is. I mean, it provides us the parameters around what it is that we have to cover, and that those decisions mean we have to be very prudent budget managers and look at things that we wished we could have and things that we absolutely need. And the digital systems person would be important, especially in an environment with a tremendous amount of need to look at security systems with regards to protecting personally identifiable information, both for children as well as for our staff members, and all the other kinds of things that would help us to be good managers of our resources. There's a lot of inventory control. Maureen, Melissa, and I talk a lot about downloading apps, and although those apps may be free, they live on our network and they pose security problems for us. So it's managing all of that, and so all of those decisions do have to still be overseen. And so we're constantly looking at ways to make sure that happens, within reason in terms of our budget. So we may not have that person there, but we still have those needs.
Yeah.
And so we're going to be managing those, and we do have to make some decisions, and that, we'll be making recommendations to our board, and our board then will have to weigh all of those and consider those kinds of things, consider all the things that we wish we could do, but the reality of, what the state gives us, the additional reserves that may be available in the district, be available to add to the, to our, the taxes and what the school district has available to use. And the realities of, those things that we have to do every year, as we explained in the Budget 101 presentations, that we are a service industry. We don't, most people don't see us that way, but that is what we are. Our services are the human beings, who teach the children, who make sure that our buildings are clean, who make sure that our children are cared for, and every year there are costs associated, and that's in that, that consumer price index. So all those things I know you understand. You're a financial person.
Was there ever a data protection officer approved this year?
That was pushed off by the state. What is required is and we were actually talking about that, Ms. Berman, Ms. Andrus, and who else was there? I think there are just two, who are represent the policy committee along with Ms. Szymanski. The state requires that we have a data privacy policy in place by December. So we were just looking at that yesterday, and so we are required to put that into place, and then we're required to identify a data privacy
It is, I think it's officer, isn't it?
officer, yes. And so we won't be able to hire, someone for that, so that responsibility will fall on existing staff.
Thank you, Nancy.
So, firstly, thanks to the board for all the hard work you guys have done. But I think looking from the outside in, I guess we are where we are, right? I mean, I'm sure you probably wish the process was probably a little bit better. But the question I have is, what if this is not approved? I know you had a slide up there. And honestly felt a little bit like a hostage slide to me. Kind of feeding it on the emotion, because we are all caring parents, but so actually, the tone of that slide, I didn't particularly like, because it was like, well, if you don't approve it, then everything gets delayed by a year, costs are going to go up, blah, 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 blah. Isn't there any other way, if this gets declined, to move the process forward? I mean, you still have $18.3 million, and it shouldn't be as binary as I think what we've got up there.
Yeah. So I know, and when we put that slide up, I appreciate your comments, because of course, I can see why it would read that way. And I think it was just not so much, it was just to put some facts and maybe just something out there to show kind of some of the considerations that we were looking at. Unfortunately, like this process is extremely, it's a fairly long process for both the architects to undertake their work and create documents that then need to be submitted to the state. And there's, considerable timelines at each time. And even where we would have required to get back to the budget, if that's what the charge was to do, there was a very good chance, and not because I think it, but because that's what, based upon our professionals and their ability to get the work done and up to the state, missing that time frame. And that's just the truth. And that was part of what we were faced with in the time frame in terms of when we found out, because in order to go out to bid to get the project mobilized, and I think there was actually even a board meeting in which there was some talk about, oh, would we start the construction in October? And I'm like, I mean, this mobilization of the project site is huge. I think anyone who's gone to Hillside on a given day, I don't even want to drive up there during the day in my car. When the thought of having, construction vehicles and everything, and actually rock blasted during the school year, like that kind of put us into that time frame of the summer. So I guess the answer is that I think, just based upon what the time frames and the time required it would take to, it wasn't that there was never an option just to like make things slightly smaller and get it back into budget. It just, that was not, that wasn't going to get us back to that first number. If it goes down, and we'll redesign it, and it's not, and it'll be we'll move forward, and there'll be a school built. But unfortunately, because of the timing of the state and getting all those approvals, that's a little bit of the challenge. That's all. I mean, that's not something any of us want, but that's just what it is. So,
I'd just like to make a comment. Can you hear me? I'm sorry? I apologize, because I'm going to have to leave before this meeting ends, and I really appreciate everyone who showed up tonight. I know that there are people here on several sides of the aisle, and it means a lot to have people take the time and come to this and really try to understand it, and I know there are a lot of questions that still have to be answered. I haven't really shared this with anybody on the board, but I realized as I was sitting here that while I have voted in favor of this as a board member, that there was a part of me that was really quite ambivalent. And when I sat down tonight to think about it and to pay attention to the presentation, I realized that there was a part of me that was really torn because of people who have raised questions, emails that I've gotten, questions that I have, and what does it mean to be a board member and take the fiduciary responsibility piece into account. How do we try to make this a community that people like me can stay in? Many people who are here tonight who I know probably want to be able to stay here and are concerned. And it's kind of weighed heavily, and I've really been thinking a lot about it. And as I sat here, I thought, okay, Jody, like, you can't come into the impeachment hearings with your mind made up already. You have to be willing to try to listen and have an open mind, if that's possible. And I have to say that I very much want to thank and I appreciate the architects and the presentation that all of you have given. And I know there's still more questions, and I know there are a lot of questions about taxes and finance. But in watching the presentation tonight and seeing how you laid it out, the process, and that it was done in a pretty simple and clear way, I feel pretty strongly that I am in favor of this now. And I have to be honest that I didn't come in tonight
feeling that way, which has been hard when people send me emails, how am I supposed to vote? Or people stop you on the street. And I want to thank you because I think you certainly clarified for me questions about the design and why it was important and how we got there. And while it is a lot, it is a huge ask for the community. I guess in the end, I feel like this is, for me, it seems like an investment in our schools and in the community that will be here for years to come, and that this is the time that I think we should be making this. And obviously, I will get through this. We'll get on to the next place. We've done it before, however this goes. But I just wanted to say thank you all, and that you've certainly have clarified for me the process and my thinking about what's the next best thing for the district as a board member. So thank you.
Hi, thank you. It's sort of, I was going to say this before Jody spoke, but I also wanted to say how much I appreciated the presentation from the architects. And I've heard a lot of sort of words getting thrown around that, this is a luxury and supersized and things like that. And looking at it, it doesn't seem that way to me. I mean, it seems like you've been very thoughtful, and I don't think anybody would want an addition that didn't look nice and, didn't add something to the school. I mean, however you slice it, it's going to be a huge investment. And I think we all want something that looks good and lasts for the future, and it doesn't seem like, to me, it doesn't seem like we're asking, that this is sort of too much or too, it seems reasonable, I guess. But what I wanted to ask was really maybe more of the superintendent, who kind of came in the middle of this process. And I was wondering if you could maybe explain a little bit more about the why and coming in sort of in the middle of this and sort of looking at the school when you came in. What needs do you feel that this is answering for the future? Like, how do you feel about this addition and coming in and at this stage in the process, really?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking. When Melissa and I started, we actually came in the middle of a class size conversation. And it was a pretty intense conversation with regards to trying to figure out how many additional children were entering kindergarten and what impact that would make on each grade as a result, because whatever, it's like a domino effect. Whatever you change is going to impact, the decisions one way or other, all the way up to the middle school. So it was a pretty significant decision that had to be made, and Amy Cases and John DeCams and the board and all of us were engaged. Actually, my first presentation to the board was about class size. So I really see the benefit and the value of what our architects and our construction managers have talked about. That, and what was really interesting was that, we do have a lot of data. We have a lot of birth data. Every school district has birth data. And every school district tracks, projections. There are things that we don't know, for example, who's moving in from another district. We don't know that. But we do our best based upon trend data. And the trend data still didn't give us the answers we needed. And that was really, it was a gamble all the way up to August 29th. There was a parent who was asking to enter the district, and it would have tipped that kindergarten over, which would have started the domino effect. And we weren't able to provide an answer to that parent until about August 28th. That's a long time to have a kindergarten parent waiting, right? But we couldn't, because it made all the difference in the world. So we have to consider that for as much as we want to have the best data to drive our best decisions, there are things that we just don't know, and we have to be prepared. And it can't be that the decision in terms of one or two additional children trigger things that we're so tight. One or two new children into the district starts this domino effect, which, as I said, extends all the way up to the middle school. We do need to sort of think about the future, we do need to think about, as Maureen mentioned, classes, for students with IEPs who need different spaces, and that we can have flexibility in the spaces. To, imagine being able to use and and I came from a district that had actually experienced or had just finished a $38.9 million construction bond. And it meant that all 100,000 square feet of the K-2 school was touched. It was almost a total renovation. And there are lots of spaces that were, things that probably people couldn't conceptualize, like how exactly would you use that? And what the purpose that would be. And it did give the schools a lot of opportunities to bring in things, more STEM programs, to be able to pull different classes together for collaborative projects, more interdisciplinary work. So that's what's ahead. And I think it's, it's in our best interest to look ahead, not just now. That's my own personal opinion. And as I said, based upon how I entered the district, class size was a really big issue, and it dominated all the conversations that we were engaged in. And I don't want to be in that position every summer.
Can I add to that?
I hope I answered that.
Just, I do remember, just as I was looking towards running, it was about class size, but also it was quite clear from the elementary school that certain specials were going to have to be put on carts at that time because of the growth that we've already incurred, and that's just will exist. Even if one grade tends to be a little bit smaller, they were already bursting at the seams, and that is where this came from originally. And so that meant that music class was going to go on a cart, and that would really limit the exposure to different instruments that students would receive. The same for the foreign language classes, which are already in that position, and one other was going to go on a cart. And yeah, and parents were really, really outraged by that because the quality of those programs would be so changed. And it was from that, the desire to satisfy that, plus the other special ed spaces that were not meeting the proper requirements, that the desire for all of this came about. The beauty of the enhanced cafeteria is not just that they made it look nice, but really to have students go through in 3 periods for lunch means that kids aren't eating at 10:30 and then getting hungry early on in their afternoon and having to face the whole day. They're eating at a more reasonable time. And then that space, as you just mentioned, can be opened up for all kinds of reasons that parents have also been requesting for ages, which is movement, collaboration, meeting spaces, special events, and indoor recess when that happens, even though I know it's contentious. At what degree do you keep them in? They are in quite a lot, and that means that there'll be that one gym available and this space. So that is a major ask of parents for as long as I can remember. So it satisfies many different areas and also is looking towards the future in a way that you just spoke.
Hi, thank you. I had a question based on something that Jody said a few minutes ago, but I think that the rest of the board can answer, and it's really a question more about process and transparency. Jody referenced that this was a big ask of the community, and I think I know what she means sort of at a gut level, and I think everyone here is appreciative of the ability to have a voice in this and participate in direct democracy this way. But it sort of struck me as curious that it is an ask that a district would need to have a community-wide vote to pull funds from a capital reserve account, because certainly we didn't vote to put the funds into that account.
We did.
It's on the ballot.
We did
So-
in this past May.
Right. But you fund it, as you described, based on what's left over in the operating budget. And some here, some there, maybe this year none to capital reserves, maybe next year more. So is it required by law that in order to take out of any of the reserve, I'm asking.
So the capital reserve, yes. Other reserves, no. So the board does have the discretion to even take, I mean, I'm not saying we would do this, but I know other districts actually that have funded capital projects out of their tax certiorari reserve, which the board can actually authorize. So I think, you know, and not that we would ever do that, but I'm saying that is the one reserve that is required to be set up by voters, although funded as the money becomes available. But the use of it is required in that one reserve account solely. Other reserve accounts that are within the district's budget, reserve fund accounts, many of those, the board actually does have the authorization without voter approval to access.
And is the aidable status impacted?
But, oh yeah, but if you don't vote on it, I just want to, and I think, I don't actually, I'm not saying, nor would we would suggest doing that, but it doesn't, if you do not have voter approval on use of the money, and it's required anyway for capital reserve funds, there's no aid eligibility. So if you don't have a voter authorization, then the state won't recognize that for building aid.
That is the.
And it makes sense that, yeah, and it's really for capital needs, so that's why.
And just to stay on that point, a significant amount, if you actually look at the change in the capital reserve, a significant amount was added in the prior year in anticipation of this work. So I was thinking about keeping this as a closing comment, but I think I just share it sort of in the vein of Jody's thoughts. But I think it's important to keep in mind that just the order of operations. We went through a vote in May, priced on, on a particular schematic that under best efforts as a board and working with architect, we had a project and a project cost. The next stage is a desire from the community and the board to open the design process. That was, I think, a thoughtful and public undertaking. Out of that, we have another design, and to the next step, you go from design to pricing. And the reality is, with the current design and the change in sort of the pricing environment, some of the things, I think the pricing environment was described by Triton well, things like steel, et cetera. It's more expensive. It simply is that. And the board, as was pointed out, became aware of it in October. We did then in turn have discussions about how to reduce cost. But the reality, and I think we really need to hit home, is with this design, whether you reduce square footage a little bit here or reduce square footage a little bit there, this is what this design costs, right? But I think somewhat fortuitously, we voted to fund the capital reserve in the last round of voting in the May budget vote. And now we're voting to use that money for its express purpose, right? So ultimately, just seeing what so you get to a point where this money's put in, it's voted on. We're voting on using it for a design that's a thoughtful design that happened to be more expensive. And if it's voted down in a democratic process, it's not a hostage scenario. The kids will still get an addition. We're just going to wind up going back to the drawing board and seeing what we can do within the context of what's available. But it's important to recognize we as a community voted to fund this reserve for this reason. And our budget leader, in a thoughtful way, said, we're doing a capital project. I've done capital projects in the past, as happened with the fields, and having a capital reserve set aside to supplement that to the extent it's needed is a very thoughtful way to manage one's fiscal house. And lo and behold, things have gotten more expensive, and we're looking for your approval to use the money that we collectively have set aside. So I think it's really quite simple. There's lots of other kind of side issues that we can focus on, but I think it's really cut and dry. And if you don't want to use that money, then collectively, not you here, but as a community, then we'll come together and work out what's in the best interest of a design and our students.
I have a question, a few questions. How many kids are in each classroom, approximately?
About, at the elementary, oh yeah, of course, we're speaking about Hillside, about 20.
Okay.
Class size 20, like 19 to 20.
I believe that this contractor is overpriced because if you look at the design of this thing, there's a foundation, which is on the back end, where the lower level would be. Most expensive things are elevators and kitchens, and I believe he has a lot of hidden costs that could really be lowered, or maybe get other bids from other contractors. I don't think that that's been done 100%, because everything's on one level.
Yeah, no, just to clarify, so the gentleman who spoke tonight is the district's construction manager, and what he does for us is it's not so much as that we did not go out to bid yet. We cannot go out to bid on a project until we have state approval on that project. So the pricing is based upon, they have resources to find out, just like when we do work at the school, we report that out to like a central repository or like a clearinghouse. So the way that they use that information to, in the current time, to price out when we say this is what the design is, what is the cost associated with that? So it's not that we have a contractor that is giving us bad pricing, but that it's based actually upon what the current pricing for similar types of work in Westchester County, which is in what we would pay, like our prevailing wage here is different than it is in even other parts of even, a little bit north than us. So we are required, schools, not to keep going on about it, but school pricing, because we're required to pay prevailing wage it's just the law, and any contractor that does work on the school, that's what we have to pay them. So pricing of school work is significantly higher. Municipal work is significant, it's maybe, I don't know, double, but even in like, if we were like the master's school, their price of construction is probably 25 to 30% less than we would pay, at least, because they do not have to pay union wages for their work as a private school. So the pricing, it is always like, when you look at it, like, oh my,
Yeah, but I understand what you're saying, but
Sure.
the structure's on one level, basically.
Yeah, I guess
know
it's,
you have to
sorry.
blast and stuff to get the rock to go underneath and do the foundation, but the small part is below, and it's just going a little bit above, to make the first floor.
Sure.
But it seems outrageous, the price that these people are asking. I understand that when you're a business or a school, they do make it higher, but his prices seem out of line.
No, and honestly, we're hoping that the pricing that our construction manager has given us actually is conservative, meaning that when we go out to bid, whenever that may be, whatever our final project is, that, we do hope that a construction manager prices it so that the district is covered, and that, in fact, we're hopeful that we would hope to see lower prices. So
But he did say in his speech over here that he has extra, like 500,000, or I don't remember all the exact figures, but he had different figures for extras and this and that and that.
Yeah,
and I think they were way above what it could be, a lot lower.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Hi, I'm Kathy Sullivan. I want to thank the superintendent for the videos that you've been putting out. They've been very informative, and I think it's a good effort to try to communicate more directly in another way with the community. I have to say I disagree with the board member about the process. It hasn't been as cut and dried per se. I look back at the newsletters that were produced when the bond was first asked, early part of last year, and it talked about that the program was decided, it was coming off the list of things that the district had identified, it was being worked with the director of facilities. That all made sense. I was trying to pay attention to it. I no longer have children in the district, but I support the district's efforts to make the facilities very good for the children. However, then we kind of get into, there was something that happened after the bond. I think someone spoke about, why was there a reshuffling of architect and design? Why was there new additions in programming? Those are, in my mind, sort of, are they needs or are they wants? I don't know. And that hasn't been very clearly described to me. You get to the point where you have a design that comes in, it's over budget. I look at the budget as, say, $2 million. $500,000 is because of cost overruns, if I understand the things I'm looking at. 150, 1.5 million is something to do with the choices that were made. And that's the question that I have. I don't really understand why those choices were made. I don't understand why, and I loved your description of it being a liberal arts college, because I just continue to thinking of when I took my kids around, I would walk in and see student unions that weren't half as beautiful as the drawings that were produced for this lunchroom. I spoke earlier about, I think it's inappropriate in scale for elementary school children. I think the telescoping seating is inappropriate potentially for elementary school children. I just can't see it as being a safe thing for kids to be on. And also, when I go look at these things, they're only in gyms. It's not really the kind of atmosphere you want to have for children, I would say. So I have some concerns. But I really think the process hasn't been as cut and dry and as you put out to be. For me as a community member, I would have loved the board to say, well, we have to look at how we get this back to the budget we've asked the community, and be able to say, we have looked at that and understand the consequences. And I know there was a presentation, I went to the December meeting, and there was a presentation that wasn't on the agenda, for, looking at some alternatives, and I've seen those now. But that's really not, in my mind, a very good faith effort to try to bring this back into line with what the community has sponsored, or what the community voted initially, not that long ago, less than a year. So thank you for your time.
I'll just address that by saying, I think as a board, we've tried to balance meeting the timelines and meeting and recognizing that with capital reserves set aside to facilitate this design, which has come about in a completely open, public, and transparent way, that entails using the capital reserve. Or alternatively, we as a board come to the community and say, there's no way we're going to keep this capital reserve, which we voted to set aside, and we're going to not use it, which I don't love the cost overrun either, but I think that we have prepared for it. So, and I don't want to use cost overrun, it's actually the wrong phrase to use. Simply the increase in cost as we've moved through the passage of going from a schematic design to a design that can be implemented. So you're balancing between, I think, going out and appropriately speaking to voters about, using this set aside, or saying, you know what, we're going to push back the timeline to 2021. But we could have a disagreement as to what the right decision there would be.
No, I understand. What I'm saying is I don't think the case has been made that clearly why the increases were merited. And I appreciate the efforts that have been happening since the bond, the recall was for the Capital Reserve Fund to be voted on. I just, one last thing, and you made me think of it. The other side of it is how it's being paid for. And that's the $900,000 is a very hopeful kind of approach to how to pay for this, despite using the reserve funds. I mean, I understand that may be some precedent for that, but that's again kind of, we aren't even halfway there with the reserve fund being voted on.
Lisa Eggert-Litvin from Hastings. I want to thank everybody for all their obvious hard work, and I want to thank our community because I think everybody's really focused and is asking excellent questions. I have two comments and a question. First comment, I think it's important, and I haven't heard anyone acknowledge this, that we were all very concerned about enrollment increasing last year. We were at an all-time high. Enrollment has decreased this year, and the projection that I saw online, I can't find it anymore though, showed a prediction for enrollment going down again next year. So I think that's important to acknowledge. I also wanted to share, and this was when I was on the board, I had questioned Maureen relentlessly about the amount we were charging in the bond. And at one point you sent me some numbers that I think came from Veronica. And it has to do with contingencies and escalation because we are being asked for an awful lot. But there was so much in the bond already. What I was these are the numbers that I had. This was just relating to Hillside, that there was a 15% design and construction contingency for $896,000, and another 4% for escalation per year, total of 2 years, $549,000. That's almost $1.5 million. And I guess already we haven't broken ground, but that's not enough, and we're being asked for more. Those are my 2 comments. My question is for Maureen, of course, is about the relationship between the capital reserve and the operating budget. So I understand that we can't use that fund to directly pay for the operating budget. So this year you can't say, oh, okay, in my line for equipment, I have $100,000. I'm just going to take it from the reserve. We can't do that. But here's my question. In budgeting for next year, say we have that 5-year plan shows that we have over $3 million of needed repairs. So say, in the operating budget, there are numerous lines for repairs and equipment, probably a couple $100,000 each year. So say we're thinking, well, we need $100,000 in this line item for equipment because we're going to need a new fill in the blank, new air conditioning. Now, could we say, we're going to buy that air conditioner, whatever, those air conditioners for $100,000 out of the capital fund with the approval, and then my line item in next year's budget can be lower. Is that correct? Yes. But I just want to make sure. So in a way, I mean, I'm concerned because I attended the Finance Committee and I heard our superintendent clearly say that if we do a rollover budget, meaning keeping everything we have now, we're going to be over the cap and the board won't go over the cap. Mm-hmm. So it's a way to create, and I've heard we're talking about cutting aides at Hillside. Sure. So we could use this money to buy things so that we don't have to budget for them and create more room. And then if we have issues of staff, like you were talking about the importance of this director, for the safety of our children, we could open up room. Is that correct?
Yes, so I just want to speak to the process. You're right that as we have spoken about that, the current use toward this particular purpose would not generate any additional taxes. But to your point, if you use it for this purpose, then it wouldn't be available for other needs that exist in the district. But to speak to, and I do feel very strongly that, as I have always, that whatever we're using, we definitely don't want to use the entire amount, and if we were to, it has to be a priority. It's extremely important to fund your capital reserve. But in terms of process for the capital reserve, the only thing I would say is a little bit different in terms of the capital reserve fund in order to maximize and get the aid back on projects. Some of them, you're absolutely right, in the 5-year plan would be something we could plan for, we would time for, we could then get the paperwork submitted to the state, because again, we want to, the purpose of having a capital reserve fund, in addition to being able to not have to issue bonds and ensure that you're taking care of your physical plan and planning for things that you may feel are necessary to support your programs, you also want to maximize the dollars in state aid. And I know you also, because we spoke a lot about planning and things, and the one issue in terms of just using it for like a one-off against the operational budget, depending on the timing, some of it absolutely that are more planned out into the future, but some of those items may not, just because of the timing of getting the approval, we might not always be able to do that. But it is, there are funds in the operational budget, and because we're using this money for that purpose, they would not be available. So kind of an answer, but the Capital Reserve Fund is a critical fund for planning work and getting the aid back.
Hi, Natalie Barry. I guess I agree with Kathy Sullivan, who may or may not be here still. I didn't think the process after the bond was approved was terrifically transparent. I know I have a lot of frequent contact with older residents, and a lot of them are, I'm not speaking for everyone, but a lot of them are concerned that we're going back, or you guys are going back and asking for more funds from the capital fund. But I guess my personal concern is that it's an opportunity cost. We're going to be using these capital funds for Hillside, but that means that we won't be able to be using them for anything at the middle school and high school. Yeah, it will replenish the funds at a certain point, but still, we could have used it we could, in the next couple of years, use it for some necessary improvements. And I'm very familiar with how old the Farragut complex is. I mean, Farragut Middle School was built in 1904. The rest of the high school was built in the 1930s. And I know a lot of it's been replaced over the years, and we've done a pretty good job of keeping that place together, but you don't know what's going to happen. So I guess that's my concern. We're putting a lot of eggs in one basket, and we could be using some of those funds down at the other complex. So.
Very fair. Very fair. Yeah, it's true. That's true.
This is a little more on the capital reserve fund. I also saw in that table of the reserve funds that in 16 and 17, 016, 017, 180, 180, 18, 800 something thousand, 19, 1.1 or so, projected 2020, 1.3. So there was a substantial increase in the money given to the capital reserve fund, presumably from leftover money in 2017. Prudently, it sounds like, thinking from this moment in time, in anticipation of a shortfall, if the bond passed at the amount that the school board asked for. I also remember that in the early presentations about the bond, there was almost a throwaway comment of, well, when we started thinking about what we need, and it was about 30-something million dollars, if I remember right, and that was never going to fly past the community. So we came down to something in the 20s, and that was too high. And eventually we came down to the number that was proposed and that passed. So putting together the anticipation of a shortfall by putting the money into the capital fund prior to the bond implies it was a lowball number.
Well, I think the capital fund, no matter whether we were doing a project, it is, again, it's a fund that many districts like ours are trying to, if they do not have one, they do try to establish one. But I think what Tim was referencing, and again, it's not so much about a shortfall, but I think there was some discussion, maybe not publicly, but I mean amongst the board when they were structuring the bond, should we issue, should we ask for $18 million and take some out of the reserve fund? And I think what Tim was referencing is, certainly, we're not wanting or hoping to have a shortfall, but with the timing and the evolution of projects, and it's not unique to Hastings, and I'm sorry that Kevin left, and I did want him to speak to this just more globally in terms of other districts. I don't know, I mean, partly is because of the timing in which districts, we don't have a fully developed design when we're pricing. So it's a schematic design, and I guess but a project of this magnitude may have a little bit more chance of not necessarily, it's a larger scale project, so that the costs associated with that are higher. But in terms of the planning of doing that, our bond project, the last project, we did, in fact, and the voters approved use of the capital reserve funds to offset that project. And we did have areas in that project that were, in fact, in order to complete it, we did require to get funds out of there. And we did get a vote, and we did, excuse me, I'm sorry.
And I'll just respond. I mean, at no point in time in the evolution and arrival at the final bond cost that went out to vote was there a single conversation that said, hey, this might not be enough money, but rather through the past experience of the prior bond and Maureen's long time in the district and doing this work, anticipating a project that represents almost north of 30% of the budget, and the reality of doing work that extends over multiple years, the time there's an opportunity with excess money to fund reserves. Just a question of what reserve it's going into. And with the capital project coming forward, putting some of that money into a capital reserve seems appropriate, particularly given that it's past history.
I can also add that it's common for other districts in the area to supplement the spending of their bonded capital projects with monies from capital reserves. For example, Dobbs Ferry voted yes to supplement their $18.27 million bond with $1.7 million in capital reserves this past year. Bronxville voters said yes to supplement their $21 million bond with $1 million of capital reserves in 2018. And Valhalla voters approved using $3.3 million in capital reserves along with their $6.6 million bond in 2016. I don't have the voting history, I just have that it was approved and added to their projects.
I think it's reasonable. Absolutely. I think it's a reasonable ask.
I think it's always a challenge because more developed designs cost a lot of money also. There are significant architectural fees, so you're playing. Yeah, but the bond fails and you've spent $800,000 on architectural fees. That's also something that's large. Yeah.
Okay. I guess I have a bit of a different question. It's regarding the structural design. And so I think we all know that that Somers and White Plains and Dobbs Ferry and many other towns in Westchester are turning to greener sources of energy, and with goals to eliminate 50% of our energy footprints by 2030. Hastings isn't really doing much for that, to aid in that. So I guess I had a question. What would be the possibility of having solar panels on top of Hillside right now? What can they support? How much can they support weight-wise while it's still being safe?
So I do know, I don't have the exact answer, but we did actually, so the answer is that after this project is completed, and I'm not speaking about the addition, but the new roofing projects of both buildings, we will in fact go out for another RFP for solar panels. We actually did that a few years back, and we were with Solar City at a point of executing a contract. And some of our roofing that is now going to be addressed in this upcoming summer at both the Farragut as well as the Hillside, at the time that space would have been needed, and the solar company was reluctant because they said, well, if you have to replace these roofs, and the payback on solar panels, as you know, is a fairly significant time period. We actually have an array at Hillside that were more for educational purposes that have been up there for probably 12 or 15 years. But the answer to your question is yes, that will be, in fact, that's the plan with not anything to do with the addition, but with the existing roofing project now complete. We can now move forward with RFPing the solar panels. And if you're interested, I mean, I can get additional information in terms of what they anticipated. And we were also planning on having like a battery backup system. So we have a couple configurations that I think that may work, and it may actually even be better now as the technology's gotten better. Sorry, yeah. Sure.
Unless you put them on a structure above it, which would ruin the picture of the design. So are we obligated to have the roof slope in that direction? Or could we better slope it?
The roof is sloped in the direction it is for the obvious reason that the stage is down at the low end and the retractable seating is at the other end. So you're right in that it's not optimal for a solar array. However, the whole hillside roof is flat and offers ample opportunity to put other panels on it. It was a discussion that we had, quite vigorous discussion in the office about that, and we really felt that it was important to put the stage where it is, and that meant sloping the roof the other way, contrary. But what it does do is it lets a lot of natural light in to the building.
So I've been sort of hesitating to speak my mind, but this is just a personal comment. I obviously respect the process, and I'm really thankful for all the hard work and expertise put into the decision, but I guess I'm just reacting. I'm not obviously in finance or architecture or construction. I've been in public education for more than 20 years, and I'm kind of feeling a bit defeated that we're focused more on what we look like and what our buildings look like than who we are. And it seems like the conversation is all about getting the right amount of money. And of course, that would, I think the design would serve. If the bond passes, it'll be fine. And if it doesn't, it'll still be fine. But I guess I'm just feeling like we've made a decision to think about where the money is best used. And I think that's what I'm struggling with. If there are needs in the school, and I think we've mentioned special education a couple of times, if as a community we can raise this kind of money, wouldn't we want to raise it for really places where it would make a difference and difference to the community? And I think when I'm thinking of public education, I'm thinking of equity, and I'm not finding this to be a very equitable solution, because if it's passed, some people in the community will have to pay this tab, and it's ultimately going to push out economically diverse communities, and maybe those numbers won't go up as high as we want them to go. And then I'm thinking of excellence in public education, and I don't think that's happening either, because we're compromising on aids, as I'm listening, and I know we've struggled with special education for a long time. So I'm sort of struggling with, where our priorities are, and maybe it's something that I have to reckon with. And I'm confused about the design for special education, because my field is special education, and if anything, new architectural buildings are looking for more inclusive education spaces, not separate resource room spaces. So again, I'm not sure where that added space or cost is coming from, and if anything, we probably need a better special education unit or staff or some more help for the students. So it's a personal reaction, but I think I'm feeling very strongly about it. So thank you for letting me share my thoughts.
Can I just say one thing to that response? One of the things that we're trying really to do in service to equity and inclusion is to bring back and keep students who may need to be educated outside of the district because we don't have the programming. And most often the programming has to do with space. So students who have greater needs sometimes need spaces that are much larger, and certainly need spaces that are more flexible and agile. And the spaces that are being proposed for Hillside address that. We don't want to segregate our students. We want to use those classroom spaces that are contiguous to all the other classroom spaces. And we want those spaces to allow for providers to push in and offer the services within, so there's, it minimizes segregation. And we also want the spaces to have the capacity to expand to multisensory resources and materials So it really is, in service to equity. It is in service to, inclusion when we don't have to pull children out and place them elsewhere, but we can educate them with their peers, their grade level peers in the district and within the same location that all the other grades are. So that, I think, is, whether that was initially in the design, I don't know, but that's how I look at spaces as well, and that we talk a lot about spaces with regards to making sure that we don't recreate segregated environments for learners.
I also want to add to that and just say that your thoughts are spot on to a lot of discussions we had pre-bond, and really thinking about the fact that it had been over 20 years since the learning and program spaces within Hillside had really been considered for our students and for the staff and teachers that work there. And so the investment that we're making now is really significant in thinking about the spaces purposefully for both general education, special education, making sure we're providing dedicated spaces for all the specialist programs that are very important for our community and for our students. And really thinking about the investment that we're making in learning. There's real evidence that shows that investing in the physical spaces for learning improves teacher retention, job satisfaction. It actually improves student performance. So the kinds of things that we've been thinking about will really address the equity issues that have been on your mind.
The equity issue comes from the tax increases that are inevitable. And I think this space is the community. And I think that is not a very logical solution.
You said you need a new roof. Is there any way that that's in this bond, or that's a separate issue?
No, it's currently in the bond.
But is it with this project, since they have, if they do this addition, are they going to do the solar at the same time and replace the roof, or that's not part of it?
So, no, so the roof that is scheduled to be replaced is on the existing building, and that's already accounted for, and actually that project is already up in the state for approval. And the solar projects, because the way solar projects are structured, they're done through a energy performance type agreement, and there's no capital outlay to the school, because the savings in the energy helps offset the cost of leasing the panels. So that will occur after the work is complete. We'll start that process with selecting companies that, we can, again, get the solar arrays installed. Again, it's actually a zero outlay cost. It's an offset in your energy costs.
I just wanted to mention that I think a lot of the things that I think that everyone is talking about here, the wonderful things we get from the building and how nice it will all be, I think you're going to get either one of those, whether you get the extra money or not. But I think what's really important for I think the board to understand is that, and I think someone back here was talking about it earlier, is that it would be amazing to have all of those things, but I think it's really important about also what we can afford as a community, and I think it's really important, I think, for us to keep those things in mind, that a bigger classroom, you're going to get the things with the bond regardless, whether the classroom is this big or that big, and or the other things that you're talking about in adding with the extra costs there. And I think it's important to note that it's important for the board to keep in mind that those things are important to make sure that we can afford these things. And sure, it would be great to have a Range Rover, but that Honda Pilot does just as well, right? And I think people are really concerned about how those costs are being put inside. Thanks.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. I know everyone's got a lot of different, very good opinions on this topic. I appreciate you taking time to come out. Certainly, if you have more questions, feel free to email the board. I know many of you have already. And we look forward to seeing you for the vote on February 6th. Thank you.